part of the afternoon or this evening is really to take a look at how children learn, how children can be groomed differently, how do we as teachers or educators really do things differently. All right, so you know about the academic brain. You know that children learn reading, math, science, and so forth. You've had several sessions today that have talked about all the academics. Well, I'm not talking about the academics at all. I'm going to be talking about the other parts of what children are. Around their emotional health, I'm going to be talking about body, be talking about creative brains, critical thinking, social skills. One of the things that we're often missing in many of our curriculums, in our teaching, is that other piece. So, as the title said, Healthy Children, Healthy Minds looks at really developing those 5 other components. So hopefully you'll be interested and want to participate when we get to each one of those. We know that motivation is key. What motivates you? Just yell out. What motivates you? Food. Food. All right. Food is one of the primary motivators. Sex? Oh, success. Oh, I saw. All right. I'm getting old. My hearing's not that good. But you know what? When you talk to kids, often that is a motivator. So, all right, success. Anything else? Praise. Okay. What else motivates you? Yes? Interest, such as? All right, what you're doing. So a lot of people are motivated by different things. Well, children often have motivation as well. So what we have to do is we have to start looking at how are we going to make learning, how are you going to make the experience of learning something that a child will see that it's relevant to them, that it's purposeful, it actually has some fun. How many of you have been in a situation where you've seen kids just so overwhelmingly giddy with the excitement of learning something new? Isn't that a powerful tool? How often do we see a child sitting in front of a worksheet excited to do the worksheet? Not as often, right? And so therefore, how are we making learning fun? How are we helping kids to work hard, to be involved in their life, in their learning? How are we helping kids to try? I work on, or in many different circumstances where I see kids who have major behavior problems, mental health issues, anxiety, and the biggest thing that they don't have is motivation. And motivation is something that we can build, it's something that we can expose children to, and we can also help them learn that you've got to try. You've got to start doing something. Way back when I was in college, one of the things that I wanted to do was to, before I retire, was to go to 100 countries in the world. Dubai is number 80 for me. So it's an accomplishment, but I've had to stay motivated, save my money, do what I needed to do to experience one of the goals. I was very motivated to see the world. So I have 20 more. I'm seeing Poland in June and Sri Lanka in January, so we'll be up to 82. And part of the motivation is building those interests that we have. So, thinking that is self-directive, self-monitored, self-disciplined, self-corrected are all of the sort of the new buzzwords that we're hearing in education now. We're saying that, why are kids not able to have a direction in life? Anyone want to answer that question? Why do children not have a direction in life? I'm sorry? No motivation, yes? Exactly. Can you all hear? Probably not. No? You know, I need one of those persons who loves running around with a microphone. Do we have one of those available? No. All right. So one of the things that I really want people to start to think about is, how do we teach children how to ask questions? Do you know that on the average, a teacher every day answers 1,000 questions? And out of those 1,000 questions, most of the answers are yes or no. So part of helping children become healthier is we need to help them to figure out how to look at a situation, generate solutions or possibilities, take a look at, okay, what's going on, and how are we going to solve it? How many times do we see children say to an adult, well, you solve it, and they don't like your solution? Are any of you parents? Yes? And you make the decision for your child, and then they're not happy about your decision? Well, part of helping children become healthier is we have to teach them how to look at situations in their lives and be able to say, okay, what's going on? What kinds of things do I need to understand before I can make a decision? Open-mindedness. When you hear the word open mind, what do you think that means? Yes? Oh, no? What do you think open-minded means? Yes?
Being able to listen attentively and take it all in.
Yeah, being able to listen without judging. That's the key, without judging. And if we look at our vocabularies, oftentimes we judge. Yes, sir? To be creative. Good. Remember that, because in a little while I'm going to be asking you to be very creative. Okay? And I think part of being able to have an open mind is, how do we communicate with people? How do we teach children to actually listen to others? It's a challenge, isn't it? Because many children are at a point in their lives who are very egocentric. What happens is we see that egocentric children become egocentric adults. And so therefore we have a population that has a sense of entitlement. So, when we take a look at thinking, how do we help children to understand how they think? So one of the things that I'm sure you're all familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, which really helps synthesize all of the information about how we process learning, how we bring learning into our lives. And so part of that is, how are we able to model as adults so that children are able to actually see what these things are? So what I'd like you to do is, if you look at these 16 habits of mind for essential success, I would like you to take a look and turn to the person beside you and say, here are the 3 things out of this list that I do super well. I am great at, I excel at. And what are 3 things that you say, nah, I still have to work on personally? You'll have about 3 minutes. So turn to the person beside you. Which 3 do you do well? Which 3 are you working on? So if we look at this list, is there anyone who does all 16 perfectly well? Anyone? No? Well, if we look at all of these things as habits of mind, these are all skills that we have to teach children, because we as adults struggle with many of those things. And so how are we helping to empower children to think differently about themselves, but also to think differently about how and why they do the things they do? And so the important thing is, how often are we able to include that in a typical day at school, no matter where you work in the world? Many of the schools, the school districts, the boards of education are really focused on making sure that we have very strong standards for excellence, for proficiency. Well, these habits of mind need to be incorporated in our day-to-day teaching to help students become adults that have the ability to identify the 3 strong points you just mentioned and the 3 things you're working. It's a lifelong process, obviously. Now, I don't know if you're familiar, but Howard Gardner has published some new research about the 5 minds for the future. And the first one is the disciplined mind, and how are we exposing kids to a variety of experiences? How are we helping them to have those wow moments when they're learning something? Well, we know the internet is obviously globally connected one way, but how are we giving them a variety of experiences in that little rural town that they live in or the big city that they live in? The second is looking at how do they make sense of what they're learning? How do they take things and they are able to put it together to understand something? We often, I don't know about you, but if I taught middle school, which is like 10 to 14-year-olds, and they seem to get a perspective on something, and it takes like a jackhammer to try to get them to change their minds. So part of it is how are we helping them build a synthesizing mind? The creative mind. How do we help them come up with original solutions? Because the marketplace says business wants people who think creatively. They want people who can problem solve. They want people who can look at a situation and come up with multiple solutions. The respectful mind. This is a mind that, I don't know about you, but have you noticed that people seem to be a little ruder these days? Go to an airport. Go through the custom lines in Dubai. Oh my God, I saw people not very nice to each other as they're trying to get into the country. So how are we helping people become more respectful? And the ethical mind is, do we have a generation of kids who don't know the difference between right or wrong? Would you agree, disagree? Are we having a generation of children who will take actions and not worry about the ethical consequences of it? So something that obviously we're trying to work on. So the creative brain is the first one that we're going to look at. One of the things that we know for sure, music, art, dance, all kinds of involvement with the arts creates an ability for the brain to think differently. Because when you use your creative side, you use that other side of your brain that helps you learn other kinds of things. So we now know that if you use musical training as a way to become more active, children are more likely to become better learners. So these are all kinds of things that are used in, oops, sorry, went a little too far, are used in a classroom. So write to the person beside you, how many of those things have you used in your classroom to teach students something new? When we're looking at exercise, we know that this generation of children is going to be the heaviest in terms of the past generations. We know that children across the world are having some issues around nutrition, around understanding how to use food. And so we're seeing that, I know that in the United States from the research that I was doing, is that we're seeing half of the elementary school boys are not getting enough exercise. They're very good at sitting in front of a TV, a computer, with a Game Boy inside. Some kids don't actually know how to play outside. And so part of that is one of the issues that we're trying to get kids to become much better in terms of their memory. So these are all activities that we can do for kids. I get lots and lots of pushback from teachers who want to take recess away. Well, I'm not going to have you do push-ups in here because that would be inappropriate. But with kids, if you take, during your teaching, you take 2 seconds, they do jumping jacks, they do push-ups, they do lunges, they have skipping ropes. I've seen teachers ask gym teachers for skipping ropes for their classrooms to give their students a break physically so that the brain, and we know for a fact that children learn best once their brain has been stimulated through physical exercise. Nutrition. We know that many children don't eat properly. How many of you had some junk food today? Oh, how many of you had those pastries that were full of sugars, fat? I know, aren't they great? They're good, they're wonderful. But one of the things that we know for a fact is that the more you eat of those things, the more hungry you become. And so you having lots and lots of fat, salt, sugar, even beyond your body's need, will end up continually fueling this sense of hunger. And I don't know about you, but when I'm in the schools, I see a lot of kids eating Doritos, potato chips, soda. Many of the schools have gotten away from serving children any type of Coke, diet stuff, because of the impact that it has on their bodies. And so we know that we have to teach children how to read labels, how to look at what they're allowed to eat and still be healthy. How many of you have had a chance to eat a really big meal in the last week? Yeah? How'd you feel? You felt completely full? Lazy. Weak. I'm sorry? Sleepy, exactly. It was great? It felt good? What happens is that when we eat too much or we eat the wrong kinds of food, our body says to us, hey, listen here, your stomach is telling you it's too much, it's not healthy. And all that excessive fat, excessive salt, sugar, where do you think it goes? You just put an IV hose here and just suck it out? No. Where do you think it goes? It goes into your muscles, it goes into your brain. And therefore, I always say to people, never buy a house or make a big investment after you've had a big meal, because you're not able to think clearly, because all of your thinking power from your brain is in your stomach. So I have some land if anybody would like to buy some. All right. We need to help kids know about nutrition. We need to help them understand that food is not something that is, how can I explain, is going to fulfill a need because something is missing. We know that, as I'll talk about depression and anxiety and so forth in a few minutes, we know that a lot of people turn to food as a way to fill this craving that they have, and most of the time, the craving doesn't go away. Kids eat and eat and eat, and it still is there when they wake up in the morning. So, here's Adam. Adam's a kid that I work with. I said, Adam, I'm doing a presentation. There'll be people from all over the world. Give me a picture that I can use. Look at the picture that Adam gave me. What does that tell you about Adam? He's normal? Yeah, he's a normal teenager. So he says, this is the best picture. I said, you realize that people from all over the world are going to see this? And he says, oh yeah, well, perfectly fine. So Adam is a 14-year-old. He's a social outcast. He's immature. He's awkward. He's very outspoken. He's very, very sharp. He's a very, very smart kid. He does well in school, but he often tells you how smart he really is. Have you met this little lawyer in your classrooms, or this kid that is always like looking to make you wrong? To point out that you are wrong, again, for the 17th time today? Well, meet Adam. And so what happens is that when you point that out to people over and over again, people don't like you. People don't want to be around you. And that's exactly what's happening with his peers. So his behavior is very outrageous. So what do you think's going on with Adam? So turn to the person beside you, see what's figuring out, see if you can figure out what Adam's all about, and what would you recommend that you do with a kid like this? All of the research that I've been doing, and I've written several books on this, and it's really, we have a generation of students that are experiencing depression at an all-time high, anxiety, kids who aren't able to deal with several, family problems, issues, because they're suffering. And we know that if you look at some of these statistics, chances are you're working with kids who are experiencing all of those components every single day they're in the classroom. And so when we look at that, people often say, well, what's the reason? What are the reasons why we have kids committing suicide? That many of them, by 50% of them, will have a lifetime of mental illness. Do you remember when you were younger seeing so many kids who had those kinds of problems? No? Yes? More so now? Yeah. So what are the reasons? What's happening? What's happening in our world that there are kids who have more mental illness? Yes?
I feel like there's more isolation.
Yep.
And technology not allowed to just go mess around with your friends.
Yep. We have a whole generation of kids who don't know how to interact with other kids. And it's interesting because as people, we're social animals. If I said to you, I will grant you one wish, and the one wish that I will grant you is I'm going to put you on a deserted island in the middle of the Pacific or the Indian Oceans, and you'll be there by yourself. And you can have everything you want in life, except you cannot have other people. How many of you would say, I want that ticket? Oh, you want that ticket? Oh. Well, what happens is most people don't want that ticket, because we're social beings. And so one of the things that we need to take a look at is these are the four most common that we're seeing now in children. The whole issue of anxiety, ADHD, the mood disorders, the general signs. Schizophrenia is on the rise. People have theories about why there is an increase in these mental illness. It's because of all of the toxins in our food, our air, our water. Is it affecting how we live? Is it affecting our DNA? Because we have children who are already starting to show manifestations of mental illness as early as 6 months. Kids who are identified as being difficult children become very difficult and very unable to cope with what's going on in the regular stressors of being a kid. So if you take a look at how you understand mental illness, is I want people, as part of being a messenger, is that many symptoms of mental illness are often behavior problems. And people only respond to the behavior and don't look deeper. And so one of the things that I'm wanting you to take a look at is, what's the reason for the behavior? What's the function of the behavior? What's the root cause of the behavior? And if you start to work backwards, you can start to see that there are links to different components: anxiety, depression, attention, all those other kinds of things. So one of the things that we are discovering, and I've discovered in my research, is it's much more complicated. Very rarely will you only have a kid who's depressed. You have a kid who's anxious and depressed. Very rarely will you have a kid who has behavior issues. They'll have anger issues on top of that. You'll have a kid who's depressed but also has an eating disorder. It's never clear cut. And educators are struggling to say, what's happening? I see these behaviors, and when I work with them, I say, okay, you see this, dig deeper, dig deeper, dig deeper. And sometimes kids are so good at camouflaging or covering up their mental illness that the adults around them have no clue. Parents have no clue. And so part of it is how are we helping kids to become more expressive, but also to really think about what's happening within themselves. So here's Sophia. So turn to the person beside you. Tell me what's going on with Sophia and how would you handle her behavior. So I'm going to ask you a question. Any of you think she has mental illness? No? Some say yes. How many say yes? I want to take a survey. How many think she has mental illness? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Come on up, 6 people. Come on up. Let's go. Come on. Come. 6. Let's go. All right. Come on up. Why do you think there's mental illness? What are the things that you're seeing up there that may indicate signs of mental illness?
Self-critical. She's overly self-critical and overly perfectionist.
Okay.
Tendencies.
I was going to say, in comparison with the one before, the boy before seems to be, it's like a normal boy.
Right.
But, I could cope with that. Whereas this as a teacher, I don't think I'd be able to cope with.
All right.
I feel like the red flag for me was when it says that even with teacher support, she doesn't respond to that. I feel like usually kids, when they get one-on-one attention, respond to that and then want to
Move on.
please. Yeah.
Yep.
She's lacking concentration.
Okay.
So
So we have concentration, we have lack of attention, you were saying as well about,
I was saying there's nothing that you can do or seemingly.
right, nothing you can, like she's hopeless.
Yeah.
Ugh, just get her out.
Self-critical.
Self-critical. Yes, what would you?
Looks detached,
She looks completely detached.
Yeah.
The picture.
disinterested. Yes, looking at the picture, she's detached, and then I also consider the violent tantrums.
Do you remember this slide here? The fact is, as all of the points that you were making, she is definitely on her way to severe. She's not there yet. She's exhibiting a lot of typical type of behaviors that teachers would say, oh, it's just typical students. She's acting out. She's starting to be withdrawn. One of the things that you really want to think about is how are kids presenting themselves physically? Looking at her picture, what's the difference with her picture than the one from Adam? She's completely disengaged. She looks depressed, right? What's happening with Sophia is that she doesn't have any coping skills. She doesn't know how to think about her life, her situation. She's a good student, can be a good student, but doesn't have the coping skills. And the people who work with her are struggling because she has, I don't care attitude. Leave me alone. And if you work with teenage girls, at some point they push you away. If we don't help this kid, she's going to be a statistic. That's where she's heading, and we know that. So part of it is how do we put strategies into place? So the next few slides I have are full of strategies of things, like I said, if you want the PowerPoint, just come up and I'll gladly give it to you. These are all things that we are looking at to help kids with anxieties. Signal systems, cueing, telling you when back off, telling you that they're going to get into a period of such anxiety. I have had kids who get so angry at teachers because of the anxiety, and this happened to me personally, they let go of their bowels in the classroom. They eat and chew their nails. They bang their heads. They become obsessive compulsive. The key is we have to be able to recognize that anxiety is created from the brain. How many times have you heard an adult say to a kid, get over it. It's not a big problem. Why are you making such a big deal? But it's a big deal for the kid. It's not a big deal for you. So the fact is, how are we recognizing the anxiety and where it's coming from? I have found, working with kids who have behavior problems, consistency. It's not rocket science, but if you are consistent every single day, they'll know what to expect from you. They may not like it, but at least they'll know what to expect. These are all examples of strategies for depression. Give kids an opportunity to be a leader. Help students make connections. Because we know for many, many years, people thought that depressed kids are the kids who stay in their bedrooms under the covers and don't want to come out. Yes, there are those who do that, but there's a whole new group of kids who are exhibiting their depression through violence. They feel like a victim. So what do? They find another victim who's weaker than they are, and they begin perpetration of the whole bullying piece. And I did a research study many years ago where I looked at 1,300 students, and almost 75% of the kids who exhibited depression also had violent behavior problems. There is a connection, because when you're frustrated, and you can't do anything, and you feel helpless, and you feel hopeless, what are you going to do? You're going to lash out at someone. And so we're seeing more and more people who are having anger issues, and the root cause is because of depression. Again, these are all things you can do. We've heard about ADHD for years. Again, lots and lots of different strategies that you can use. You know how those exercise balls, those big exercise balls? Yeah, I have a couple colleagues in my department who don't sit in a chair. You don't sit in a chair? Well, I'm chair of my department. And she came in and she said, here's an invoice. I said, for what? She says, I bought an exercise balloon. Ball. I said, for what? And she says, and she has ADHD and she's got her PhD, and she says just the rocking forth helps her concentrate. They're not that expensive. They're like $5 or whatever. It's really a way to get kids to think about it. I think as we take a look at boredom, how often are kids bored in school? Probably more often than we want to admit it, right? All right, when we're looking at attention, we shouldn't be doing things for more than 15, 20 minutes as I talk to you for an hour. But the thing is that if I only had 15 minutes, it would have been more difficult to cover. We also have to figure out that what are we asking kids to do? Are we asking kids to do things for practice? Yeah, we have to do that. But are we really asking kids to think? Or are we doing all the work for them? How are we making thinking different? Remember when I first began the presentation, it was around how do we help kids think differently? So, little cartoon here. As you can see, you don't pay attention to me. Yes, I do. You're not paying attention to me, paying attention to you. How often do we, a parent and a kid, have that conversation, right? We know for a fact that if a kid says to you, oh, I need to watch TV when I'm doing my work, not helpful. The brain, even though multitasking, we all can multitask. Well, the fact is, can you do it all well? And the key is, as we, I don't know about you, but I get very uptight when I'm in a car, somebody's driving and they're texting. Where I live, it's against the law, but you still see a lot of people do it. Your brain cannot function and do two things. The fact that they did studies that people who are texting and people who are drunk drivers, the fact is the behaviors are worse if you're texting. At least when you're drunk, you're kind of like, okay, I got to really pay attention here. Oh, you know, and you drive at 2 miles an hour. Well, texting, you drive at 70 miles an hour and you're trying to do this on the steering wheel. Well, how do we focus our attention? So, did that catch your attention? What I'm trying to show you is that any teacher, any principal, any time can do these kinds of things, these strategies. And one of the problems that I often see is that people don't know. It's just that, if I have a kid who's drugged, he may just be completely passive, but he's not thinking. He's not able to function. He's not able to interact with other people. So what I've been proposing in all of my research is, how am I going to get kids and teachers to work together doing some simple tasks like this? Adjust the time, adjust the difficulty, present things differently, give kids wellness breaks, look at mindfulness. Look at this, books on tape. Sometimes kids just need to hear it. This is not rocket science. All of these are strategies for kids to pay attention more or to focus their attention. Looking at 5-minute warnings. Have you ever had the kids say, I want to continue doing what I'm doing and leave me alone? And they become a whole behavior problem because it's time to move on to something else. So 5-minute warnings. Group discussions. Again, all things that teachers can do in a classroom. Mindfulness is looking at your body is here, is your mind present? How are we teaching kids to be in the moment? How are we helping them to think about what's happening here, not thinking of what's happening in the past or what's in the future? One of the things, mindfulness is the new buzzword for children. How do we teach children to know about what's happening in their brains and in their bodies, how they're feeling about themselves, how to make connections with their behavior, how to be compassionate? How are we getting kids to be able to be connected with what they hear, what they feel? Because we're so busy. I know that when I was teaching, I had 8 classes every 40 minutes. Move, move, move. Have to teach, teach. Okay, next group. And the kids are in a cycle of haste. And so how are we helping kids to become more focused? And this is an interesting quote. Dalai Lama came to Boston, and it was interesting in his presentation. He said, if every 8-year-old in the world is taught meditation, we will eliminate violence from the world within 1 generation. 1 generation, we will eliminate violence. Is that even possible? Well, it is if we take children and we teach them about mindfulness and about being connected. For those of you who have smart tablets here are several of the mindfulness apps that you can take a look at it. The mindfulness, Zen, smiling, mind. These are all things that you can use as a resource for kids to get them to start thinking about centralizing who they are, centralizing their events in their life. So as we come to near the end, we know that if we get kids to start focusing on who they are, about how they're thinking, about how they're feeling, they will become much more thoughtful and reflective people. And so when we help children become more connected with each other, they develop those skills that are lifelong, those interpersonal skills, those abilities to work with anyone else that they work with, to interact with people, to be in a position where they can have a much happier life. So before you leave, I want you to look at this list. All right, I want you to look at this list, do things for others, connect with people, take care of your body, notice the world around you, be part of something bigger, be comfortable with who you are, find ways to bounce back, take a positive approach, have goals to look forward to, or keep learning new things. I want you to choose 2 things that you are going to commit to doing in the next week, next month. What are 2 things that you're going to try to integrate into your life to be a happier person? And I want you to tell the person beside you, because verbally, if you make that commitment, think about what you really want to do is to invest in you. Now the goal is for you to look at this list, think about it, and share it with as many people as you can, including all of the children in your classrooms, your principal, your boss, doesn't matter, and say, this is what we need to do. Thank you so much.